Chapter 7. The Devereaux Grand Ballroom was only used for special occasions on the planet. Since it was not the most active planet in the Empire, these occasions only presented themselves once every 10 years or so when a coronation ceremony or wedding was held here. The ballroom floors were a thick polished redwood. The rib-vaulted ceilings were covered in a gray marble tile from the quarry on Zenta. All of the chairs were either lined or tipped with gold. Their cushions were made of a fine purple silk and a soft plush, which was popular on Rye 4 at the time of their design. There were a set of stairs which ran alongside the sides of the ballroom. These would lead to the dining room and the imperial balcony. This was only the second time Lemuel had visited the room. The first was the wedding of her oldest brother to the Earl of the Eastern Continent. They were a lesser nobility, but Grand Duchess Devereaux had decided that all of her grandchildren would have their weddings in the Grand Hall as she did. It was a break from tradition, but no one on the planet dared to speak up about it directly to the proud old woman. She now sat 2 seats away from her granddaughter, wearing an elaborate dark blue gown with white lace and holding a pearly white cane. The seating in the grand ballroom was arranged so that the members of the Devereaux family sat at the front on a large stage. Their seats were arranged in a pointed formation, with the head of the family making up the tip of the point. On her left sat her daughter and granddaughter, if she had one. On her right sat her husband, son-in-law, and any males of the family. If any of the men were married, they would sit out among the visitors with their families. Lemuel smiled at her young niece. The girl had blonde curls and light brown eyes. She smiled and waved back before being distracted by all of the sights and sounds in the room. The center of the grand ballroom was reserved for dancing. While a band played music suitable to the occasion, no one had stood to dance. Everyone was seated and waited eagerly for the arrival of the Empress. Lemuel had grown tired of waiting, looked to her mother. "How much longer will it be until the Empress arrives?" "Oh dear, I do not know. This is quite the occasion, you know. The imperial family has never visited, not even once. You know they say that the last time they visited was shortly after we were given the planet." "That's what they say," said the Empress, came to visit the Grand Duchess after the war. "We don't know the details, but some people say that shortly after that visit the Grand Duchess was with child. She was married before that, but there are rumors abound. It's all legend, of course. We couldn't possibly be related to the first. We have none of the traits that his bloodline has. Lemuel, are you even listening to me?" Lemuel sheepishly played with the golden chain attached to the bodice of her dress and looked back at her mother. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mother. I must have been distracted. Isn't this ball just wonderful?" She wasn't as adept at playing the ditz as her mother was at living as one, but she managed to get by without offending her most times. Trista frowned at her daughter and turned back to face the door. Some of the latecomers had odd looks on her face. Priest. Playing the ditz. D-I-T-Z. You're ditzy. Both of you. Heads out of the fucking gutters. Trista frowned at her daughter and turned back to face the door. Some of her latecomers had odd looks on their faces and were pointing in the direction of the spaceport. Lemuel's curiosity was beginning to grasp at her, but she needed to resist the urge to run to a door to check. The windows in the grand ballroom were linked to viewers, but those viewers were not showing what was actually outside of them. The young woman let out a sigh and continued to run the chain through her fingers. Lemuel noticed a feeling of overwhelming calm had come over the room. The doors to the grand ballroom opened, and through them stepped 2 bodies wearing imperial armor. One of the forms was that of a Barbary, though not quite as large as their soccer cousins. They were still of considerable size when compared to the human races. The second wore white armor and no helmet. It did wear a veil covering the upper half of its face. The head of the second form was covered with what Lemuel could only recognize as fur. As she was examining the second form, a third entered the room between them. Immediately a hush came over the room as the third figure entered. Without thinking, or perhaps she had seen everyone else do it, Lemuel stood and lowered her head. She craned her neck to get a look at the third person. The woman wore a gown that appeared to shift in color with every step she took, and she walked with the grace of a swan on the water. The gown she wore had no lace and very few adornments. It covered her entire body from neck to toe. The gloves were part of the gown itself, and there was a distinctive click of heels with every step as she took. Her movements made her appear to be floating on an unseen cloud. She wore no veil or helmet. And her long white hair flowed down her back. Her eyes were an icy blue, and even from this distance Lemuel could tell that there seemed to be fire coming up from them. Her skin was a ghostly white and gave off an almost ethereal glow. There was no question to anyone in the room that this woman was the Empress of the Rye 4, Caria. Lemuel felt a sharp jab at her ribs and a painful slap on the bottom of her chin. She saw her mother giving her a stern look, and only then did she realize that her jaw was open nearly the entire time she was staring at the Empress. Caria and her 2 escorts moved down to the purple carpet which lined the ballroom. They climbed the stairs to the imperial balcony, and Lemuel followed their journey with eager eyes. When the Empress reached her seat, she began to speak. Her voice was mellifluous as she addressed the crowd. Dear friends of the true Empire, and ancient allies of the Ryfor, thank you for your hospitality. My visit to your world will be brief, however I thank you for this night of reprieve from my troubles. She paused for a moment and looked to the white-veiled figure. Please, let this evening's festivities continue uninterrupted. For a moment, the room was silent. Lemuel thought she heard someone whispering in her ear. She watched as the Empress took her seat. Madame Devereux turned to the band and snapped her fingers. Taking the signal, continued to play. What does that word mean, Dan, since I'm in between paragraphs anyway? Anyway, the band, taking the signal, continued to play. Some of the ball-goers immediately climbed the stairs to the dining floor. Lemuel suspected that some of them had no desire to eat, and they only wanted to be that much closer to the Empress. Though Lemuel felt the same compulsion, she felt a stronger one in the form of her mother and grandmother to stay where she was. Without accounting for elevation, the Empress was seated directly across from the ruling family. From her position, she could see the dining floor as well as the lower ballroom floor. Blood of the first, she's beautiful. Lemuel was staring at the Empress, but she felt the sudden stabbing glares of her mother and grandmother. Their faces were painted with a sort of shock. Only then did she realize what she had just said. It was bad form to curse, even worse to curse in front of one's elders and the ruler of the planet. Doing this in the presence of the Empress was almost a criminal offense to most of the nobility. Lemuel felt her face grew hotter as all of the blood ran to her cheeks. Excuse my language, grandmother. The old woman's voice was soft but scratchy. Don't let it happen again, little P. Think nothing of it, though, and calm yourself. You look like a fruit. We'll go up properly, greet the Empress shortly. I can't have it looking like we dipped you into a vat of red dye. Lemuel blushed again, and then noticed the whispering again. She started to hear it earlier, but had discounted it as part of the general clamor involved with having so many people in such a small room. She looked at her mother to see if anyone else had noticed it, but she appeared to be the only one. Her heart began to race as his family stood to make their procession to the Empress. Lemuel also stood, but she had already begun to drown the lights and the sound of the ball. She followed because she saw others doing something. Her mind was focused on the whispers. Me, too. Before she realized it, she had already climbed the steps. She continued to look around the room for someone who could be calling her. Then she turned to the Empress. She was standing directly in front of her. The iced fire eyes, more intense as close, were nearly piercing her. Lemuel knelt before her and tried to recite what she had been taught as a child about meeting the Empress. O great descendant of the first, I humbly submit myself to your power and grace. It is for you that I strive and succeed to be a better subject. I only hope that I can live up to your expectations. Thank you for receiving me. How may I serve you? As was tradition, the Empress smiled and laid a hand gently on her head. This meant that she had no required service at this time, and she could stand and place herself with her family again. This was a greeting that was carried out between all of the planet rulers and the Imperial ruler upon their meeting. It was rare that the Imperial ruler would ever ask for anything. The final person to extend this greeting was the Grand Duchess. She finished in the usual way. Thank you for receiving me. How may I serve you? A soft frown crossed Kyria's face for just a moment. I would ask you for your system fleet. Your planet is far out of the way and has a little need for it, and it would be of more use to me in my struggles. The Grand Duchess looked up to the Empress with shock in her eyes. I must think on this. You'll have your answer tomorrow, my Empress. The Duchess stood and gave a bow, then turned and walked down the stairs. The family fell in line behind her, but Lemuel lingered for a moment. She noticed that the Empress was still looking at her, but the large Saku stepped in front of Lemuel, blocking her view. She felt a gentle hand on her back and turned to see the thinly veiled figure standing in front of her. From this distance it was obvious that her hair was covered in small feathers, not fur as she had originally thought. Aveline. The veiled woman nodded, and then turned to the Empress. For a moment they shared a glance, and then she turned back to Lemuel. Yes, I am. Now, young Duchess, you must go. Come to me. Lemuel turned back to the Empress one last time, and then started down the stairs. She didn't know what to think of the whispers, but as she stepped slowly down the stairs after her family, she knew that they were not coming from the Empress. She took another step and tried to work out the source. Why would the Empress continue to summon her if she was standing right in front of her? Another step, and more thoughts flooded her mind. I'm not gonna fucking whisper. Jeez. I'm not gonna. Oh my. Another step and more thoughts flooded her mind. Someone else was talking to her. Either that or she's going completely crazy. Come to me, my Saifi. The voice was booming inside of her head. She tried to ignore it and continued to walk down the stairs. Come to me, Saifi. The voice was even louder this time, and she lost her concentration. Her heel caught on her dress, and she suddenly felt the world slipping from her. The ballroom had turned upside down. Everyone was watching her as she flew through the air. She hit the ground with a sickening thud, and then everything went black. That's it. It's over. We're gonna go watch